Tonight's reading is from Mark chapter 13, which can be found on page 1018 in your Pew Bibles. That's Mark chapter 13, starting at verse 1. As Jesus was leaving the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what massive stones, what magnificent buildings." "Do you see all these great buildings?" replied Jesus. "Not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down." As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will these things happen? And what will be the sign that they are all about to be fulfilled?" Jesus said to them, "Watch out that no one deceives you. Many will come in my name, claiming, 'I am he,' and will deceive many. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places, and famines. These are the beginning of birth pains. You must be on your guard. You will be handed over to the local councils and flogged in the synagogues. On account of me, you will stand before governors and kings as witnesses to them. And the gospel must first be preached to all nations. Whenever you are arrested and brought to trial, do not worry beforehand about what to say. Just say whatever is given to you at the time, for it is not you speaking, but the Holy Spirit. Brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child. Children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death. Everyone will hate you because of me, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. When you see the abomination that causes desolation standing where it does not belong, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the housetop go down or enter the house to take anything out. Let no one in the field go back to get their cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that this will not take place in winter, because those will be days of distress, unequaled from the beginning, when God created the world, until now, and never to be equaled again. If the Lord had not cut short those days, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, whom he has chosen, he has shortened them. At that time, if anyone says to you, 'Look, here is the Messiah,' or 'Look, there he is,' do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. So be on your guard. I have told you everything in advance. But in those days, following that distress, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time, people will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. And he will send his angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of the heavens. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see these things happening, you know that it is near, right at the door. Truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. But about that day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Be on guard, be alert. You do not know when that time will come. It's like a man going away. He leaves his house and puts his servants in charge, each with their assigned task, and tells the one at the door to keep watch. Therefore, keep watch, because you do not know when the owner of the house will come back, whether in the evening, or at midnight, or when the cock crows, or at dawn. If he comes suddenly, do not let him find you sleeping. What I say to you, I say to everyone, watch.
Paul Webber, I'm one of the ministers here, and we're going to have a little break from the formal part of the service now. So you can go up and chat to people. You can chat to people about many things. One, if they've done formation school or not. Or secondly, the big theme we're thinking about tonight is about the end of the world, and a major theme. And you could chat to people if they think of any films that talk about the end of the world, or any songs about it, or any people who've claimed things about the end of the world. I made a little list here, but I'm sure there's a lot more. Okay, you can get up, have a wander around. If we have the lights up a little bit, that would be great. Sorry to interrupt your conversations. Hopefully you can carry on having those after. But hopefully you get to know some people. We are a family. I want to be accepting, loving family. Anybody got any insights then or thoughts about films or songs or people? Mr. Addy? The Day After Tomorrow. 2004, I think, where New York got frozen because of global warming. I don't know every film and song that's ever mentioned at the end of time. Any more? Yes. Independence Day? Yeah. 2012? And Wall-E? Yeah. That's true. Great. Okay, these are 4 that I found. One was Armageddon in 1998, where the world was under threat of being destroyed by an asteroid. And then 2 that I've never seen, but Melancholia and Take Shelter. Some songs. Prince, in his song 1999, sang, "War is all around us. My mind says, prepare to fight. So if I'm going to die, I'm going to listen to my body tonight." And then Bob Dylan, in 1963, wrote a song called "Talking World War III Blues," about the end of the world. There's different opinions in the UK and in the States about the apocalypse, the end of the world. In the UK in 2015, 23% of the general public believed that the apocalypse was likely to occur in their lifetime, compared to the 10% of experts from the Global Challenges Foundation. And then the general public believed that the likeliest cause would be nuclear war, while experts thought it would be artificial intelligence. And between 1% and 3% of people thought the apocalypse would be caused by zombies or alien invasion. There's been a variety of cult leaders who've claimed dates for the end of the world. If you look on Wikipedia, there's just loads. So I just picked out a couple from those who claimed that the end of the world would be after the year 2000. And there's just many. And it's interesting, the last ones there's a guy called David Mead, who claimed the world would end in October 2017. Then when that didn't happen, he claimed it would be the 23rd of April 2018. Yeah. And then I got another guy, obviously there's some future predictions there. Ronald Vineland has made a prediction, made another prediction in 2012, and he got that one wrong. So he now thinks it'll be the 9th of June 2019. So many different views, so many different perspectives, claims. How do we know what to think about the end of the world, and who are we to listen to? Well, Mark 13 shows us there is only one authentic interpreter of the ages. And in the parallel passages in Matthew 24 and in Luke chapter 21, Jesus unfolds the future as he describes the period between his resurrection and his return. And in the Bible, this period is called the last days, and we are living in that now. We're living in the last days. And there may be plenty of time to go before the end of the last days, but there may be not. Now, the passage we're looking at tonight has 2 major themes. A significant event which was to happen to Jerusalem in the lifetime of some of the listeners. That was the destruction of the temple in AD 70, about 40 years after Jesus uttered these words. And then also a long-term perspective of the end of the world. And to be honest, it's not always easy to spot which verses are addressing which subject. But even then, these two subjects are not totally separate. They're not distinct events, because AD 70, when the temple was destroyed, prefigures, is a picture of what will happen when Jesus returns. And history demonstrated that what Jesus said about Jerusalem was true. And then it raises a question for us. He was right about that. So are we going to trust him for the future of the world? So this may be a difficult chapter, but it's definitely a practical chapter, because it teaches us about how to wait for something greater. And unless you get that right, you're going to get so many other things in life wrong. And this chapter is not about sign spotting, but holding to the promises of God and keeping on to those when life becomes very unstable for you. It enables us to be wise as we wait. I don't know if you picked up that theme of waiting. Look at the passage with me and look at verse 5 about watching and waiting and being alert. Jesus said to them, watch out that no one deceives you. Then look at verse 9. You must be on your guard. And then look at verse 23. So be on your guard. I've told you everything in advance. And then look at verse 33. Be on your guard. Be alert. Verse 35. Therefore keep watch. And verse 37. What I say to you, I say to everyone. Watch. And the passage ends with a story of someone who owns a house, but has gone out and left the servants in charge. There's a little phrase in verse 34. It says, he leaves his house and puts his servant in charge, each with their assigned task. And this is great, one of the great sayings of this chapter, that everyone has a responsibility. Everyone has an assigned task, a job to do. So we're to watch and we're to wait so we don't become lazy and fall asleep. Because we don't know when the owner, God, is going to come back. So whether time is long or short, we wait actively because there is work to be done whilst we wait. So let's dive into this passage then. We're in Jesus' last week here on earth. And verse 1, Jesus walked out of the temple, and one of his disciples commented on how wonderful and amazing the temple was. But Jesus responds in verse 2 that this wonderful system showing Jewish authority was doomed to destruction. Now, it's really hard for us to understand how shocking that statement of Jesus is. It's like someone saying to us, if we were in London, see those Houses of Parliament, see MI6, see St. Paul's Cathedral, they're all going to be destroyed. Because if they were, that would mean the UK would have been defeated, overcome by people who want to destroy us and want to take away our values. And Jesus looks at the temple and says, its days are numbered. And we must be careful as well not to spiritualize buildings, because the Church of Jesus Christ is about people. It's not about bricks. This place, this building is no more holy or sacred than a home or a bar or a concert venue or a football stadium. It's a place which enables us to fulfill what we feel God has called us to do. Now, great architecture can move us and inspire us, but they cannot speak of lasting reality because they're all destined for destruction. They cannot save us. And so one of the disciples asks in verse 4, our question, when? When is the end of the world, Jesus? Because the temple was where they thought God dwelt. And if the temple was destroyed, then that's the end of the world. But notice Jesus refuses to answer that question. Jerusalem was really just the beginning of the end. Look at the end of verse 7. Such things must happen about Jerusalem, but the end is still to come. Now, the when question is a natural one that we all ask. And an answer, if Jesus just gave it, would satisfy our curiosity. But it would also relieve us of the need to be ready for Jesus' return. And Jesus also refuses to answer the sign question. But rather than giving just one sign, he makes some hazard warning lights for the journey. And they equip us as to what to expect in a broken world as we wait for him to return. So here's the first warning light. It's in verses 5 and 6. The presence of church deceivers. Jesus said to them, "Watch out that no one deceives you. Many will come in my name, claiming I am he, and will deceive many." Many will be deceived. Not just a few naive people, many. That's solemn, isn't it? Frightening, in a way. You may know that many of the New Testament letters were written to keep people on track, to prevent them from being deceived. And it'll always be the way from Bar Kokhba in the 2nd century to David Berg, the founder of the Children of God cult in the 20th century. There have been people willing to claim, verse 6, I am he, ready to assert themselves as the spokesperson for divine revelation, fresh truth, something new, saying God is speaking through me. And that's the essence of a false prophet, that they have claimed to have fresh divine insight. That's the style of cults and of sects. And you see in verse 22, sometimes that extends to them performing signs and miracles as well. But what a striking contrast that is to a true prophet. How do you know if someone is a true prophet? Well, what did John the Baptist say when he was around in Jesus' time? Did he say, I am he? No, he came saying, I am not he. True prophets are the I am nots of this world. They don't point to themselves, but they point people to Jesus. They don't say, listen to my special and innovative teaching. They say, listen to Jesus. They point people to the Bible, and they say, come and encounter Jesus through his word. So the false prophet says, I am he. The true prophet says, I am not. But the presence of deceivers is the first characteristic of the last days. The second theme is in verses 7 and 8, worsening world conflict and natural disaster, political and physical calamity. And from the downfall of Rome in the 5th century through to the war against ISIS, from the burying of Pompeii in the 1st century to the shattering of Haiti and Japan in the 21st century, from the Black Death to cancer. People across centuries have argued, this is the big one, it's here. We are the generation, it's arrived. But those people who claim it's definitely now haven't listened to Jesus in verse 7. For he says, do not be alarmed. And he says at the end of verse 8, these things are not the end. But in one sense, they are the beginning of the end. These are the times of suffering which make people listen. These are the crises that remind us we can't solve our own problems, that God may have something to say in the midst of this turmoil, that Christ is near now, if only we would turn to him. That's the second warning, the second warning light. And the third is the triumph of the persecuted church. My friends, we need to not fool ourselves by saying that being a Christian is comfortable. Jesus is clear. Look at verse 13 in his summary. Everyone will hate you because of me. Of course, we have a relatively easy time in Britain, and it's tempting to conclude that this is normal all over the world. But Jesus suggests here, in fact, this is abnormal. In the last days, the church can expect to be under pressure. You see, when the church is doing its job and is true to its Lord, the world will find this hard to swallow. Have you found that? Jesus said there will be opposition from structures and authorities in verse 9. I find it increasingly challenging as a foster carer and as a chair of governors in a large primary school to hold to the traditional views on sexuality and not be marginalized for that. And then Jesus says in verse 12, there'll even be opposition from families. And we have people in our church who've had to flee their homes and their families because they're followers of Jesus. Or if they're able to stay in their homes, they've had to endure mockery from so-called loved ones for their trust in Jesus. These are frightening words. And yet right in the middle of them is verse 10. And that the gospel, the good news of Jesus, is going to be effectively proclaimed all over the world. And that's the tension in these verses. The church is pressed down, and yet the gospel is spreading to the ends of the world. And think how it's happened in this country and from this country. If I'd been preaching here 100 years ago, we would have said, well, we've made a good start on world mission, but there's still a long way to go. And now we can look back and see how we progressed over the last century alone through organizations like Operation Mobilization, or Navigators, or YWAM, or Wycliffe Bible Translators, and Tear Fund. World mission is surging forward, and what a wonderful thing that is. Think of China, for example. When the missionaries were thrown out in the 1950s, there were about 1 million followers of Jesus, but now there are over 100 million. But things are becoming increasingly difficult in China again, and we need to pray for our brothers and sisters there, as most of the missionaries are being thrown out of the country. Like a little bit of interaction now. Do you know what the top two fastest growing churches in the world are? They're both Muslim countries. And if you do know, do you have an idea of the percentage growth? You don't have to give me that if you don't want to. Shout out. Iran, so that's the fastest growing church. In 2015, mission organization Operation World estimated annual growth of, anyone want to have a guess? 20% annual growth. Yet Christians in Iran face relentless persecution, as the Iranians in their church can testify. Ranked 9th in the Open Doors list of countries where it's most dangerous to be a Christian, open churches are forbidden, and converting from Islam, the state religion, is punishable by death for men and life imprisonment for women. Last year, more than 100 Christians were arrested or imprisoned, and allegations of torture have emerged. But according to Mark Howard of Elam Ministries, an organization founded by Iranian church leaders with the purpose of expanding the church in Iran, more Iranians have become Christians in the last 2 decades than in the previous 13 centuries combined. He says in 1979, there were an estimated 500 Christians from a Muslim background in Iran. Today, there are hundreds of thousands, some say more than 1 million. Whatever the exact number, many Iranians, he says, are turning to Jesus as Lord and Savior. Okay, which country is second fastest? Afghanistan, that's right. Any idea of the percentage growth? Obviously less than 20. 17%. And God has done that. The gospel has done that. The good news of Jesus reaches all sorts of places, but it also reaches all sorts of people. Look at verse 9. You must be on your guard. You'll be handed over to local authorities and flogged in the synagogues. On account of me, you will stand before governors and kings as witnesses to them. But sometimes this will happen against our will. Think how God fulfilled his purpose in Paul when he stood before Festus in Acts 25. Or of Junani Lumum. He was the archbishop of the church in Uganda who protested against the dictator Idi Amin because of his policies of arbitrary killings and unexplained disappearances. He was arrested in February 1977 and died shortly after that. But since 2015, Uganda has a public holiday on the 16th of February to celebrate his life. So you'd never think any of these tyrants would ever get to hear the gospel, would you? But God makes sure they do. And that's a mark of the last days. When the church is under pressure, the gospel spreads. And it spreads to the ends of the earth, and the leaders and the tyrants and the dictators hear about it. So you see, you can shut the church buildings. You can ban Bible colleges. You can throw out the missionaries. You can send the secret police knocking at the doors. But in the last days, you cannot thwart the purposes and the plan of God. And the triumph of the persecuted church is a mark of the last days. Well, the fourth theme of the last days is the fall of Jerusalem itself. And Jesus sketches this out in verses 14 to 23. It's interesting, it's not until verse 14 that Jesus begins to answer the disciples' when question. And he paints out an intricate way about what's to come. And again, we see a remarkable interweaving of themes. Some are clearly linked to the horrors of AD 70, when the physical temple was destroyed. Some of them are soon to be fulfilled in historical details, but others are projected onto the bigger screen of the great tribulation which precedes the Lord's return. And this is a horrific time when Satan has a field day. One last final, but ultimately futile push against the church before things end. And the fall of Jerusalem is a kind of curtain raiser for that. It's a picture of what's to come. And I'm sure it is an explanation of verse 30, which often confuses many people as they look at this chapter, when Jesus says, this generation will see these things happening. That's probably as they look ahead to the fall of Jerusalem. But what matters for us here is not so much the details. It's about whether we can trust Jesus in all of this. We know he was right about the destruction of Jerusalem, of the temple, because that happened in history. That, if you like, authenticates him as a prophet. The question is, will you trust him with the big one? Well, we're examining themes, signs, if you like, of the last days. Things we need to know, things to keep us steady, things to stop us from panicking. And we've seen some general signs of the times. And then we've seen some specific signs, the fall of Jerusalem and the great tribulation to come, which God promises. Verse 20, he promises to shorten them for the sake of the elect. The elect means the Christians, the followers of him all around the world. But there's one sign that is entirely unequivocal. There's a concluding sign. We've had general signs, we've had specific signs, and then there's going to be a concluding sign. And that sign is the majestic return, the glorious return of Jesus in verses 24 to 31. But how do you describe the indescribable? It talks about the fixed points of the very universe in verses 24 and 25, that they will be disrupted. And then verse 26, at that time everyone will see the Son of Man. The Son of Man is one of the many titles for Jesus. And he will be coming in great power and glory. My friends, there's something shockingly public about it all. And it defies our tendencies to privatize or spiritualize our faith. I mean, it's hard to believe this, isn't it? But remember, all of this was explained to 4 uneducated young men on a hillside just outside Jerusalem. Our people say, if only we could see, then we would believe Jesus. But my friends, there are many things we can't see. And often the most important things in life are things we can't see. What about love, for example? How do I know if my wife, Rebecca, really loves me? I mean, maybe she's just been waiting all these years for our insurance pot to increase. And then in my drink tomorrow morning over breakfast, I'm just going to be gone. Can't see love. All you can see is the evidence. You look at what it points to. And the evidence is here. He has been trustworthy about Jerusalem. And will we trust him about other matters? And that is important because if Jesus is right, that one day you will see him. But my friends, for many, it might be too late. Because here is the event that is frighteningly public. Here is the event that will break into our ordinary life with all its busyness and routine. And it will take many by surprise. One person said this, they will expect only the next day, but they will discover the last day. And as the parable in Matthew reminds us, one will be taken and one will be left in that great ingathering of the church in verse 27 here. History will be over. Judgment will occur. The things that should last will last. And the wonderful plans of God will be finally completed. Well, as we finish, this chapter talks about the future. And it's the most reliable information we can have about the future, but it comes because it comes from the Lord of the future, the one who's defeated death. And it reminds us about 3 vital things. The first one is this, that this universe is not self-explanatory. It can neither be fully understood nor explained in terms of our own experience. And humans have spent years trying to find reasons for everything within this world as we know it. Yet so often we struggle for answers of our ultimate purpose or of our identity or of how we decide what is right and wrong, our morals. And yet I wonder whether in this generation in particular, that must have a significant effect on our mental health. If we don't know who we are, where we come from, or where we're going. Because we can only make sense of the world when we relate to we link it to the Creator's plans. And have you begun to do that for yourself? To relate to your Creator as your Lord in all of your life. You see, history will end. Not when humans decide, but ultimately when God does. Because he is in control. And secondly, God cannot be defeated. Much of our church today around the world looks weak and pathetic. But Jesus reminds his confused friends here that God cannot be defeated. His Son is coming to reign supreme. His prophecies will come to pass. His people will meet him just as he promised. God is going to win. And he announces here, before the battle has really even started. And what a wonderful thing that is. And that's a bold thing to do, unless you know how the future will be. And he is the beginning and the end. He's the Lord of the future. And finally, the future belongs to Jesus Christ. As we go through the Christian life, it can feel sometimes that God has forgotten us, that he's gone, that he's left this world, that things are out of control. My friends, don't you believe it? And verse 34 picks up on this theme. The owner is away, but only temporarily. He's coming back. And yet, meanwhile, the lights are on. The house is occupied because the servants are there. And they should be working. They should be awake. They should be waiting. And the New Testament says unmistakably that the God who sent Jesus to rescue the world is the same God who will send him to reign over this world. And my friends, if we can see his faithfulness in the past, and if we have guidance about the future, then we can trust him in the present. So my friends, we don't have to worry about Brexit. And that's a big thing from someone who has a Danish wife. And it could impact us significantly. But we don't need to worry about what spouse we might have, or what job we should take. We can ultimately stop worrying about the future. Why? Because the future belongs to Jesus Christ. And this is the thing that I've been clinging on over the last couple of months as I'm almost fed up talking about it myself, but this extension, which is not going well in my own personal home, that my home is not ultimately here. It is heaven, and he is the Lord. And one day there will be justice, because he is the jewel in the crown of all that is taught about the final things in the Bible. So in one sense, stop worrying about the timetable of the second coming. Get hold of the fact that the future belongs to Jesus. Focus on the person. He's very near, and one day he's coming. We've got something to look forward to. Oh, what a wonderful thing that is. We await the landlord's return. I heard one wise person say this: I plan as if I live to a ripe old age, but I live as if Jesus will come back tonight. And may we live like that. May we be good at waiting and good at working.